Hey there, it's Krista Watson here from Krista Quilts, and in this video I'm going to show you how to do a really fun and funky design called bricks. Now this design can be a little bit wonky and angular, but it's still fun to stitch and add lots of texture. It can be found in my book, 99 Machine Quilting Designs. Now in my book, I love to give you lots of flowy, curvy designs that are fan favorites, but I also like to include a variety of geometric designs so you can try out which one or the other you like to stitch and what you find a little bit easier. At the end of this episode, I'll go a little bit more in depth about how I quilted this design on the quilt behind me. So stick around for that, grab your practice sample, and let's get stitching. Bricks is design number 61 from the book. For my bricks, I want to sketch out a couple of rectangle-ish shapes. They can either be vertical, horizontal, maybe they're a little bit more square, and this is going to be a dense design. So I'm going to start doing one brick, and I'm going to backtrack or stitch on top of a previous line. And the idea with these bricks is I want to get a couple rows going and I want to offset them a little bit. Now, as you may know by now, if you've watched any of my videos, you'll know that I am definitely a perfectly imperfect quilter. So what that means is these are not all the same shape, they're not all the same size, they're not totally perfect. What I'm going for is texture over perfection. So I'm going to just sketch out my bricks, and however many bricks I actually stitch on my sample is going to be definitely different than what I'm drawing, but the drawing just gives me an idea of how to move my way around the area. Now, I can do bricks in a horizontal movement like I just showed you, or I can also stitch them vertically. You can try them out and see what works for you. So here I'm kind of doing a whole bunch of bricks vertically in one direction. That almost looks like a border, but you can do other ideas as well. So let's see, I'm gonna do some bricks and then some further down. Really, this is a free motion design that can be stitched in any direction. The idea is I want to fill in all the spaces, and by working it out ahead of time, I can kind of decide, okay, do I backtrack on top of the line on the left or the right? There's really no wrong way to do this as long as you're having a good time. Again, it's a very dense design, so I wouldn't do this all over an entire quilt. And you can switch directions, but I would probably do a whole section in one direction before switching. So give this one a try, play around with it, see what variations you come up with, and have a good time doing it. Bricks is a really cool free motion design that can add some realism to your quilts, especially if you're doing a naturescape or landscape type design. However, it's very dense and slow to stitch, so I would just do it sparingly rather than across the whole quilt. This design is also very linear, meaning it's easier to stitch it in one direction, like side to side, rather than trying to stitch it as an all-over meander motif. So getting that first stack of bricks going is probably the hardest part of this design, and you'll most likely end up backtracking or stitching on top of a previous line of stitching, and that's fine. If you're using a thin thread like Aurifil 50 weight cotton, which is my favorite thread, it's very strong, but it's very thin, and so you can layer 2 or more lines of stitching and it's totally gonna look fine. So you're also gonna notice the design more when you're using a highly contrasting thread like I'm doing, but that's okay because the more you stitch it, the better it's gonna look. On a real quilt, I would probably use more of a blending thread, so all you see is the texture rather than the individual stitches. And you know what? As long as you keep stitching this design, it's really going to look good as long as you fill in all the spaces. So I'm free motion quilting, which means I'm using a specialty free motion foot to fit my machine, and I can stitch in any direction because the feed dogs are dropped and out of the way. My stitch length on my machine doesn't really matter because I'm not using a stitch regulator. Instead, I'm regulating the size of the stitches myself depending on how fast or slow I'm moving relative to the speed of my machine. It's a little bit tricky to get a nice rhythm, but the more you practice it, the easier it gets. So watch me form the bricks and you can see how really irregular they are. This is all part of my signature style or my own quilting penmanship. You're going to actually develop your own style and your own penmanship the more that you do this. So once you figure out how that looks, you can just continue practicing and it's all going to look great. I like to embrace an organic, handcrafted style, but if you prefer for your bricks to be all the same size or evenly spaced, you can definitely mark them out ahead of time and then just stitch on top of your marked lines. The idea with each brick is to offset the design so it doesn't look like an exact repeating pattern. On the other half of my sample, I'm continuing to stitch the brick pattern, but this time I'm stitching them up and down to see how that's going to look different. Remember, you can try out both designs, stitching them horizontally, stitching them vertically, to see which one feels most natural to you. You could also do a few bricks in one direction and then a few bricks in another direction, but you'll definitely need to know where you're going as you switch directions. It's totally okay to practice this design, and again, you're going to get better with every time you stitch it out. So when it's time to quilt this on a real quilt, I actually like to make a quilting plan. Now, what I draw out on my sketch pad or what I stitch out on my practice sample isn't necessarily exactly what it's going to look like on the real quilt, but again, it gives me an idea about how the design is going to flow, how I can get from point A to B, and how I can design my bricks. You may want your bricks to have nice, crisp, sharp corners, or they might be a little bit more rounded and maybe they look like cobblestones instead. But again, however it looks is going to be great as long as you fill in all the spaces. So I'm going to continue stitching out my bricks until I filled it all in. And just remember, your eye's going to notice a gap in the design before it's ever going to notice an imperfection in your stitching. This is what bricks look like stitched out together horizontally and vertically. It's super dense, but I really love the texture. Now let's talk about this quilt behind me called Interlinked. In this version, made from neutral fabrics that I designed, I've quilted a very similar design that I call circles and squares or cobblestones. It's round and square designs, but stitched very much just like I showed you how to quilt the bricks design. I quilted a combination of lots of different motifs and custom quilted it by stitching in the ditch in a few key areas and then filling in some of the areas with a few different designs. I also quilted a very similar quilting plan to this on another version of Interlinked, but this time a more colorful version, again using fun fabrics that I designed. In this larger, more colorful version, I again did the squares and the circles based on kind of what I sketched out in my quilting plan, but I also changed it up a little bit too. What you may not know is that this larger version is actually king size, and yes, I was absolutely able to do that completely on my domestic machine. Now, I have a bonus video showing how I quilted the king size version, so be sure to check the description box to a link to that video. I talk about how to base such a large quilt, how to do the quilting plan, and how to put that into action, all quilted on my domestic machine. Just remember, where there's a will, there's a way, and you can absolutely mix and match these designs to apply them to your quilts. So be sure to check out all of my bonus content, including all of my patterns, the threads that I use, my books, and everything that you need to make a quilt from start to finish. Remember, I'm here to cheer you on every step of the way. Until next time, happy quilting.